morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Your Mind Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Adam Harris. Thank you. Today is what? What's the day, Abby? Saturday what? What's the day?
Let me look at my phone.
See,
It's the 19th.
We know the day most of the time, but the date is what gets us, doesn't it?
Always.
Always.
What month, what year?
People that are, yeah, sometimes it can get you like that. It can get you. You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. As we promised on last week's show, we have with us Abby Johnson, who comes to us. She's a sociologist. And we were going to talk, as we talked about last week, about grief and loss. If you want to, we can do that. We can mix it up, right? Mm-hmm. This is an organic thing. That's the best way for it to flow. We plan, we pick up a topic, and we say, okay, we're gonna work on this, because when you do something every day, all day long, it's not difficult to talk about.
No, not at all.
Not difficult to talk, and that's what we do. Why we do the show? We do the show to bring people information that they wouldn't get necessarily anyplace else. That's the beauty of community radio. Mm-hmm. Right on. So welcome, Abby, to the show.
Hi.
This your first time on radio?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I wish we got to put like we have to have like a fanfare thing. I got to get my helper to help me with some kind of music and stuff to put together.
Ooh, a little like sound, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, we just we worked last week at a social gerontology conference. It's kind of wrap up what kind of things happen there. So people, maybe next year, it's going to go on next year.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And what kind of things, for those that are listening, kind of things that were addressed at the conference?
Well, I can't help but start with our keynote, which was Dr. Adam Harris.
You're too kind.
You're way too kind. It was amazing. It got such a great response from the attendees, because we had this variety of young and old, and we made sure that younger and older.
See, that's what gets me too. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was thinking about doing the talk, it gets me what labels to use where I'm talking. With young people, it doesn't matter, because I'm 50. Everybody, that is younger than me. Mm-hmm. But older, it's like people want to say old. It's like, I'm not old. I'm getting older.
Right.
And I don't want to offend anybody else.
Right. No. So we just say older. I think
gotcha.
that might be PC.
Is that the proper term for people over 60?
That would be, you're old, but then you have your old. You're older. Like, that's going to be your, over 75.
Okay.
But then you just have your old, and then, of course, middle age, and you're young.
Now, is elderly?
Elderly can be offensive, I think.
That's what it feels like to me, and I'm not over, but I would feel like if I were elderly feels like ancient.
Right.
It feels like somebody saying to me, "You're done.
Right.
You're finished.
Yeah. Go get in a home and go. That's right. Live out your days.
Sip on some Ensure, lay in the bed, and watch the Hallmark Channel.
That's right.
Or for most men, it's the westerns.
Right.
Or the game show channel.
That's right. God, that reminds me of my grandparents. But what was so neat about this, the conference and our keynote, and bringing up sex and age, and it just, of course, when everybody got over the shock, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about sex with these people that I don't know, who are this diverse group of, this age range, and oh gosh, and we watched one attendee, this male, he was about middle age, and he turned so red, I thought his head was just going to pop off. It was so funny. But remember that? I pointed, I was like, oh, goodness. Right. But it ended up being such, because at the end we all recapped, and it ended up being a remarkable impression it left on both younger and the older attendees, because you were talking at this table about sex, and you realize that, oh, wow, there's a lot of things we have in common. And it really, the older people who were talking loved the fact that they weren't being hushed. They were actually being listened to by these younger people. And the younger people were listening.
Sure.
It was great.
And the beauty of putting that together, the way y'all did it, was, and having those diverse, different ages together at the same table, it was so beneficial for both groups, because the older people got an opportunity to talk to younger people that weren't their family, mm-hmm. which can be very difficult for some people. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking to somebody that's not family, now once again, let me make sure people understand the context of the talk. The talk was about the attitudes concerning continued intimacy, so sex, in older age as life goes on, and the idea that people have about people as they get older, the things that actually happen to them. We didn't go into detail. It wasn't to talk about sexual, different.
Nobody's
we didn't go into positions and quirks and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't the talk. The talk was from a sociology standpoint, how we see one another in society and how it affects us. And this concept of ageism,
yes,
was something I had never really looked at, even though I do, even in my practice. And over the years, I see a lot of people over 60, right? Then the older I get, the more I realize I'm more of a contemporary with a lot of them. When I first started 20 years ago, at 30, they were much older than me. Now I'm seeing people that are my age. But this idea that it goes both ways, this ageism was something that I had not looked at. How we look at people as they age and these misperceptions that we have about them that we put on them, i.e., it's time for you to stop working. You don't have anything to contribute left.
You're talking nonsense. Whatever you say is irrelevant now.
It's all old school. We don't do that now. And then how it affects this communication between people.
And the psyche of, the older person. Like, they do feel irrelevant and not like productive members of society if they can't even have their voice heard. And, and so I know this is kind of just a little side note of ageism, but talking about sex and allowing that open forum with young people that weren't going to judge them, and they laughed and you could tell they were giggling, but they were also very serious about the attitudes of aging that were and that are. And I think it really, because at the end of the session that we do a recap at the end of the day, and it's a long day. We did session after session. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, most people stayed, and their biggest thing was, that was so fun. It was really fun. It made me feel like somebody was listening, and it could have been maybe even anything. And that's why we did the diverse tables, is because otherwise it may have had students sitting at one table, faculty sitting at the other, your senior citizens at another. Right. But we made sure we gave everybody numbers, so they had to sit with a different group, different age range. And that was amazing for everybody. And it just kind of trickles onto the reality of society and listening to older people and realizing that you don't know it all.
That's true. That's true. You don't. One of the things my dad used to tell me growing up, he used to say, as long as I'm alive, you'll never be as old as I am. You'll never be as grown as I am. And I used to think to myself, well, at some point I'm going to get grown. There's something called being growner. And then when I had my own children, I realized what he was talking about. As long as he kept living, there was always something that it's like the nuances of life he knew, but he was also learning things as he went along.
Right.
And having that communication with somebody older made a big difference in my life.
Yes. I mean, there's studies that show that children are more academically successful, socially successful, and if they have older people in their lives. The bigger the family or, social environment,
right,
the more people that are there to teach you, and you learn all these different perspectives from them, and you don't even think about that as a kid.
Yeah.
But having all these different age groups around you to tell you good job or no, don't do that, it's actually will allow you to be a better person in life. And so the conference really got people talking. And again, one of our big things about ageism is sex. It's like, in my aging class, when I taught aging, 2 people who were older than me, which I always kind of felt like, okay, I better get this right. But when is it too old or young to wear a miniskirt?
Images.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Making out on the bench at a park.
Right.
What age? And so it really makes you think, well, okay, I guess, and then all of a sudden some students are like, oh, to be president of the United States, young, old, what are these age ranges? And why do we have, these ideas put in our minds? And I do think about society today and our younger generations, and perhaps maybe it is because our nuclear families are getting, smaller and smaller, and there's less grandparents and aunts and uncles to make these impressions. But I always say, if somebody's lived on this earth longer than I have,
right,
they have had more experiences.
Sure.
Period. I mean, even if they didn't travel and they stayed in one little hut, they've still lived longer than I have.
That's right.
And I think that there's a lot of respect that needs to just automatically go to that. And I talk to a lot of younger people, and they're like, no, you have to earn my respect. And
see,
I'm like,
that's a good point.
you know, that's just not something I grew up with, and I bet you didn't either.
Generationally, that's not something. I mean, that was an automatic thing that was taught to you when you were very young,
right?
And you do see it today. It's almost as if, once again, we go back to that concept that there's nothing that you can learn from me. Right. Life will teach you, and it's true. You can live your life that way. You'll probably go through a lot more heartache than you know.
Oh, absolutely.
And you'll have very little direction. But how are we there today in this society, as opposed, or how do we compare it to other societies? When we're talking about using sex as a marker and intimacy. Some of the things that we talked about were, the ideas that when you get to be a certain age, it stops being important to you.
Right.
The younger people found out really quickly that was not true. And this is one of the reasons why I went there, is because in clinical practice, I was surprised as I got older that I started having older and older people. I mean, when I first started, let's say I had people that were 20 years older than me and were coming in and saying, the medicine you put me on, it works really well for depression. And I always ask about side effects, and I would find people were very hesitant to tell me the sexual side effects, which I always tell them up front to open the door. So when I put them on the medicine, I say, but I realized I was having this issue myself. If I put someone over a certain age, I would tell them things like dry mouth, headache, blurred vision. These were side effects, but I may not have gone into, you might have problems with orgasm, or your libido might go down. And when I had my first 60-some-year-old come tell me, hey, the medicine works great, 60-year-old woman tell me, but I don't have a sex drive anymore. And it was like, my first thought was, you still have a sex drive anyway, right? And this is 20 years ago. And that's the thought. Now, of course, I addressed it, but I had to look at myself and say, why am I coming to this assumption that at a certain age, intimacy is no longer?
Do you think that it was that do you think it had anything to do with respect? Like maybe talking about sex was a little disrespectful because we just don't do that,
Yes. And it's also the idea that people feel a sense of embarrassment talking about it. One of the examples I gave was when I saw this colonel many years ago, who, whenever I asked people about drugs and alcohol, and she was a retired lieutenant colonel. She was like 60, a little bit. Here I am in my I was in my early 30s then. And so when I normally do an assessment, I ask about, have a history of drugs or alcohol, et cetera, et cetera. Her, I asked about alcohol, but I never asked about drugs. And it was toward the end of the interview, she said, oh, by the way, this medicine you're going to put me on, will I have a problem with the marijuana I smoke? And I was, huh? You smoke marijuana? Now this was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But now today I make certain I ask everyone the same questions, whether they're 60, 70. I don't see that many 80-year-olds, but I have a few. But you think to yourself, this age group is this way, but you have to think about all of those things.
And that's social science right there, because you're putting people in groups because that's how we study them. But you also have to be empathetic and not prejudge. So, and it takes experience. And I say this, and you made a good point at the conference, to anybody going in mental health.
Yes.
Experience is everything, but if you can listen and learn from this, yes, at 31 years old, your face is going to drop when you hear, your 70-year-old client talk about orgasms, and you're going to try. But, ideally, we want to be a a non-judgmental figure.
Exactly.
But we're human. So,
yes.
It's going to.
And it's not a negative judgment. It's not done maliciously. But like you say, in many cases, it's done out of this sense of respect. And it also depends on what kind of relationship you had with older people as you were growing up, and the kinds of things you talked about with them will guide the assumptions and presumptions that you have about older people. Absolutely.
And if you notice, the filter kind of fades as the older you get. My mom's a great example of that. So, if you open that door to talk about sex, get ready.
Yes, get ready. That's true. If you open the door, get ready to find out some things. It will probably get much more detailed than we were in our talk about it, because we were talking just about the attitudes about it. But even in those talks, I think a lot of the younger people were really surprised. One lady brought up the point that her daughter, I think, was really, or granddaughter was really surprised when she was saying that she wanted a friend.
A friend, air quotes.
Exactly. And it was like, you want a friend, Grandma? And it's like, don't you want a friend? Don't you, so we look at sex, and a lot of times we'll divorce it. And that's just, for some reason, because we look at sex, unfortunately, in this culture, in this country, as being taboo, dirty.
Right.
But that's a whole other talk.
Right. And no, and I love that. That's one of the women who spoke up later at the recap. She just loved you. She's like, yeah, now you got his phone number? I was like, oh goodness, here we go. But she just thought it was great. But that it was eye-opening as I'm watching the younger people listen to her, like, oh my gosh, like, maybe my grandmother has said something about a friend or whatever. And it's like, you've said this before, like, sex is not the most important thing in a relationship until there isn't any.
Right. That's very true.
I thought my mom told me that. You said that's at some point, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. The psychological effect that it has when something has been an important part of your life for most of your life, and then when it's not, and then you lose that, there's a certain amount of self-esteem issues that go along with it, mourning for losing it, intimacy within couples.
Right.
I've seen it from the standpoint of people that are single and being alone, and loneliness is part of it.
Definitely.
But also people that are married, and when for health reasons or just even attitudes that they take themselves about the attitudes that are put on them by society.
Right.
Okay, it's time for you to stop doing that. You should stop doing that. And now it's confusing because I don't want to stop doing that.
Right.
And then my spouse does it, but can we talk about it the same way we did years ago? Right.
And I mean, and that's why sociology is so fascinating, because people are more likely to break the law than they are a social norm.
Wow.
So, people will be hugely impacted by society's views and what should and shouldn't be. And this, like you said, takes a toll. Self-esteem, you wanting that feeling of, not even if it's attraction or whatever, but that somebody wants to hold you. I mean, a hug itself is, extremely important in infancy, and it continues to be important in life.
Yes. Physical touch is mildly important to human beings. Well, I think to many of mammals, is touching one another, but to human beings in particular, it's extremely important. And it does a number of things we know from a biochemical standpoint, on your brain, on your body. So it improves health.
Yeah.
But when you lose that, as people get older, it can be, we can see a quicker decline.
Yeah. And one of the sad things, and I'll kind of switch gears to death and dying, is a lot of times when people are on their deathbeds, it hurts to even touch them. Like, for a family member, they just want to hold them and touch them, but the pain is a lot. So, that just shows how important it is to do it while you can, because, those last days, you may not be able to, and it's going to hurt even more to not be able to grab your hug one and squeeze them as hard as you can, especially in those last few days.
And that's a very good point, because that's something I don't think many people think about, unless you've had that experience with someone, to know that, and that's what it's, you have different experiences you bring to the table. Most people have never seen anyone. They go through their entire life and they've never seen anybody take their last breath.
See, and that is such an interesting question. I would ask my students, how many of you have watched someone die?
Right.
And, you'll have, I'd say out of my 22 students, I would have 2, maybe 3 at the most. And maybe one violent, but usually in a hospice surrounding. I mean, how many of you know of hospice? What do you know of hospice? And it's amazing to me that some don't even know what hospice is.
Right on.
Or they see it as, well, that's where you go, then they kill you. I've heard that before.
Right on. That's not a,
right.
That's sort of like you go here so that you can be put down.
Put down. That's
they can put you down.
That's exactly right. And I'm like, whoa. Okay, it looks like we need to cover that in this session.
Yeah.
But and